Hey MiniWarGamers, welcome to another episode of The Machine Shop. I'm Ash, and you are here to listen to me talk about war games and war gamers. So, what am I talking about this week? Well, this week I've been reading through comments and discussions and stuff in my last couple episodes, because they've actually gone to air. I'm about 3 or 4 episodes ahead of when they're actually getting posted right now, because it's nice to kind of have a bank of episodes. So some of you may feel like I've waited a while to talk about this stuff, but for me, it's actually all happening right now. But today what we're going to talk about is starting a miniature game. So what do I mean when I say that? I mean starting from scratch playing a miniature game. So when I was reading through comments and some of the discussions, what we're talking about was, or what you guys were talking about was, how do you get into a miniature game? I think that kind of dovetails nicely with my last show, which was about different formats of people playing miniature games, because that kind of falls into starting to play a miniature game. So there's lots of hurdles and obstacles and challenges, and we'll get the first one out of the way right now. Financially, well, if you're in miniature wargaming, you have some disposable income. So I'm not really going to talk about that too much, because getting into something like any kind of hobby typically costs money. So I'm going to kind of put that one on a shelf, and I'm not going to talk about it because that's a case-by-case, unique to the individual thing. It is a consideration, though, when you think about what game you're going to start. So I'm not going to talk about selecting a miniature game or the financial part of it, because I'm going to assume you've already sort of had a miniature game catch your eye, and we're going to work from there. So you're eyeballing a miniature game for whatever reason that it's come to your attention. You've got some cash in your pocket, you're thinking about starting to play a new miniature game, and that's really where I'm going to leave it. So let's talk about what that would look like then, getting into a new miniature game. So where do you start off? That's a really good question. I think that there's, today, definitely a lot more ways to find out about miniature games than there was when I started playing miniature games. So when we talk about starting off playing a miniature game for the first time, you got tons of resources these days at your disposal that you could kind of go through, and almost like a checklist to find out more information about them. But what we should probably start talking about is, how'd you find out about the miniature game? Usually people find out about miniature games one of a couple different ways. They either see it for sale somewhere, so maybe a store, a banner ad on a website, information on a forum, or they somehow bump into it and they see it advertised. They see people playing it, so they see people actively participating in a game. That could be at a gaming store, that could be at a local club, that could be anywhere really that you would encounter fellow wargamers that are already playing war games. Could be in your buddy's basement if that's where you play your miniature games, which is, in my opinion, the best place to play miniature war games, is in a basement somewhere that has a set of gaming room in it, or in a gaming room. And I think that's going to help you populate the next question, which is, why do I want to play this miniature game, and what don't I know about it? So whenever I've encountered a new miniature game, it could have been from any of the places I just talked about. Very often, I was talking about a store that I used to go to in San Francisco all the time called Game Castle. I would honestly just go to their bookshelf and look at the titles of miniature game rulebooks that I didn't already own, and sometimes collect them. I also go to online cottage industry websites like Wargames Vault, which is a great online distributor for sort of self-published and cottage industry wargaming rules, and I'll just go and click on the by genre button and see what I haven't seen before. And those are great places to go and kind of encounter those things. It's pretty rare for me to pick up a miniature game from other people, because I'm so obsessed with discovering and exploring and seeing what miniature games are available. I don't tend to find out about them from other people. Lots of people have found out about miniature games through me, though. And that's probably something else to talk about, because I seem to have a habit of getting people into other miniature games. So that's kind of the first thing, is where did you find out about it? So the things you might want to know about it could come from the internet. So there's places you can always go online and find out about them. Forums. The company might have its own website with a walkthrough, quick start rules, stuff like that. and then online stores. Because online stores will usually have their product selection broken down by manufacturer. You can usually see if there's a selection of miniatures in that game, what miniatures are available, and what you like. So that all being said, what I'd like to do is I'd like to take two sort of games that I'm talking about a whole lot right now, which would be War Machine, so War Machine Hordes, and Warhammer Fantasy Battle, and we'll use them as case studies. So if you were to get into a new game for the first time, applying the logic I just used of figure out how you found out about it, figure out where it's being played, and where you can go to get more information about it, and then where you could kind of go and explore and maybe even play the game. Let's apply that to those two games. So I think that'll be useful, and that'll make sort of my rambling discussion about how you would get into a new miniature game make sense. All right, so the internet. So let's talk about War Machine Hordes. War Machine and Hordes is a game that certainly is very well covered on the internet. There is a sort of collective of podcasts and vlogs and blogs on a website I encountered recently called Muse on Minis, and they do a great job of talking about and covering War Machine Hordes. Obviously, the Privateer Press website has forums on it, where you can talk about War Machine Hordes to your heart's content all the time, and that's a great place to start. So no matter how you found out about that game, War Machine Hordes, going on the internet, you will be offered an absolute ton of resources to find out more about that game, and just the background of it, how it's played, and kind of encounter some of the players. Now, I very much encourage you to not stop there. Every miniature game has a presence on the internet these days, and you will only usually interact with that presence by going on the internet. So don't necessarily judge or take at face value a miniature game based on its presence on the internet, whether that's to gauge its popularity, whether that's to gauge how it's played, how it's supposed to be played. The internet is a very two-dimensional place. See what I did there? It's two-dimensional because it is two-dimensional. And reading on forums, linked on message boards, while it's a great place to mine for information, you're not necessarily going to interact with those things all the time. So it's worth doing a second step of research, and that would be the local meta for that game. Now, when I say local meta, what I mean is the people in your area or that you are more likely to face-to-face encounter that play that game. Now, they're the people that you are more likely to play the game against. And there could be all kinds of different stages of people in your local meta. There could be people who are just starting, just like you. There could be people who've been playing for a long time. There could be people who play casually, people who play to win. In previous shows, I've talked about the different drivers that wargamers have in participating in a miniature game. There's going to be people with all kinds of different drivers in that local area. Now, the reason I would say that it's worth talking to people in your area, going to your local gaming store, searching online, and maybe finding clubs or local tournaments and going and checking those out, is that's going to give you a much better gauge for how the game's played locally and maybe for what the majority of preferences are for people who play that game. And the next thing you probably want to ask yourself is, why do I want to start playing this game? So if I want to start playing this game because I really like playing competitively or I like playing in tournaments, then if you can find lots of local tournaments or lots of information about tournaments about this game and meet people who play them that way online, you're more likely to get some satisfaction out of that game. You're going to know directly where to go and what to do. And that's going to leave you less frustrated. So looking at the internet, looking at your local meta, the people that are already engaged or actively involved in that game, I think that's a super important stage in starting a miniature game, because then you kind of know what you're getting into before you spend any money yet whatsoever. You can talk to game store owners, you can talk to local players. I would be much more likely to talk to the players than people who have a product on their shelves, because while you might get some information from people that have product on their shelves, unless they're actually participants in that game or hobby, you're not going to know anything of you won't know anything else about except for what happens inside the walls of that place, right? You'll know he wants you to come back there and participate in his area. So take that with a grain of salt, right? Definitely talk to players though, because they're much more likely to frequent other places, other establishments, and have a broader sort of idea. So how this relates to War Machine Hordes, what you're trying to do is, after you've identified some stuff about it that you've maybe researched on the internet, done some face-to-face foot pounding, which I really recommend you do. And then you've also identified what it is you like about this game, having talked to those people. If you know yourself as a wargamer, you know what your drivers are. Does this game offer you that, not just through its actual internet presence, but through the local meta that you're going to dive into? Then maybe it might be time to spend some money. And I would hazard, if you want to get into a miniature game, that you want to do an 80-20 preference of that. So for War Machine and Hordes, my experience, and this is just my experience, is you're going to meet a lot of people who really love playing the game of War Machine and Hordes. And if 80% of your driver of why you love playing miniature games is that complex puzzle of figuring out how to gain the advantage, pull off a brilliant move, and win, right? The binary equation of victory and defeat, then you're more likely to experience that and find that both on the internet and in your local meta. And I think that's the thing that you want to do last, is say, so is this meeting my parameters as a war game? And do I want to now shell out some cash and try and get into it? Because now you've got all the resources at your disposal, right? You can start looking at the miniature lines. You can start deciding what faction you might want to play, and then what your next step is. Playing pickup games, joining a journeyman league. There's always tons of things out there for you to do to try and get into a game. And I think that's a great. We can use that format again. So with a miniature game that's supported primarily by independent retailers and a volunteer core running events, which are primarily tournaments. You don't find a lot of events for War Machine outside of journeyman leagues that aren't tournaments. If your driver is playing the game, like that's your primary driver, then I think jumping into War Machine is probably for you if you like that type of play. So that's the process applied to War Machine. Let's talk about how I'd apply it to fantasy. All right, so Warhammer Fantasy Battle. So that same process I just used of maybe researching it on the internet, looking at what sort of like information is available for me online, looking at the local meta and the local people who play or participate in that miniature war game, and sort of soul searching and asking yourself, what's my interest in this game? That can equally be applied to a game like Warhammer Fantasy Battle. Now, in my experience, a game like Warhammer Fantasy Battle has a broader spectrum, I think, of events and activities that happen for it. And part of that is a reflection of the fact that it is supported in a lot of cities by an actual Games Workshop store. So unlike other miniature war games where you aren't necessarily going to be able to, if it's your first time ever playing a miniature war game, or war games in general, or even a miniature game, you're not necessarily going to have a ton of face-to-face real-life support in your first collection of Citadel miniatures, not Citadel miniatures, but miniatures in general. With Games Workshop games and Warhammer Fantasy Battle, they're spending money. There's a dedicated core of people who are out there to try and help you get over that hump of, I don't know if I can do this. Now, they're being paid to do it, and their ultimate goal is, because they're all employees of the company, to make money off of you. But that's fine from your seat, because if you can get free help learning to build and paint your first miniature and collect an army and free advice face-to-face, why would you not take advantage of that? It's like when you buy a car from a car dealership, and part of your agreement, if you're financed or whatever, is that you get all your service and oil changes for free, and you get your 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 mile maintenance or checkup or whatever for free as well as part of your financing, because they want you to turn that car in good condition after your financing ends. You would go and take advantage of that too. Those people want your money, right? That car dealership wants your money, but there's nothing wrong with taking advantage of the services those guys provide. So the reason I'm saying this is, I think when you research a game like Warhammer, if you do live in a major city and there's a Games Workshop store there, you have sort of an additional layer of asset where if you have a different sort of thing other than just playing the game that you're excited and interested in doing, you have a resource there. So collecting models, building and painting the models, the background and the story. There are people paid for by that company 7 days, well, not 7 days a week necessarily now, but 5 days a week at least, that will help you do those things. And you can go and take advantage of that. So not just on the internet, but also in your local meta, you have some advantage there. I think the internet stuff is going to be the same as for any other war game. There is no official Games Workshop forum, but there are more Games Workshop related Warhammer Fantasy forums, I think, than there are stars in the sky, and tons of people like talking about that game online. So you should have no difficulty finding people talking about it and doing some research about the different armies and the different ways that the game gets played. And then the local meta too, even if you just have independent retailers, you should have no problem finding fantasy players. At least a few. I would say they're thicker on the ground than most cottage industry games. Probably neck and neck with War Machine and Hordes. I'd say they're just an equal amount. Now, you feel free to disagree with me in the comments, and I'm sure you will. But remember that every fishbowl of local metas are unique, and there's always going to be a game that gets played more than others. So some places people are going to play tons of 40k. Some places people are going to play tons of War Machine and Hordes, Malifaux, whatever. You are a beautifully unique snowflake by virtue of the fact that most metas are unique, and there's always going to be extreme cases. But Warhammer's been around for so long that there are usually, even if there isn't a ton of people playing at a local game store, people playing at clubs in their basements, team tournaments, whatever happening. So after you've done that sort of like foot research, you can find out your area. Is there local painting contests, big conventions, whatever, tournaments, other events, narrative events, campaigns, specialist games like Warhammer, Blood Bowl, or whatever. That Warhammer Fantasy stuff pervades a lot of different games, a lot of different systems that all tend to pull from the same bucket of models and miniatures, and you shouldn't be too challenged to find out more about that locally. So again, after you've kind of done that research and that footwork to try and find out what's going on locally, you got to ask yourself, why do I want to play this game? And I think that's a big gamut. Warhammer is one of those games that so many people play for so many different reasons. I was just looking online about an Old Hammer community. An Old Hammer, it's kind of like people who play 30K, Warhammer 40,000, they play Horus Heresy themed games. It's literally a niche within a niche of people that play Warhammer only with like pre-1991 old lead Warhammer miniatures. They play like 3rd edition and earlier games of Warhammer. And actually my buddy Dave Taylor is going to a event at Dropzone Games in Glen Burnie, Maryland, where the old Glen Burnie Battle Bunker used to be, called Old Hammer, North America, I think, or Old Hammer USA or something like that. That's just a celebration of all this stuff. People are bringing in ancient Warhammer miniatures. So Warhammer is much more diverse than most miniature games in that there are people who are just rabid collectors. We're talking about people getting together and communicating who love collecting ancient miniatures. And these are not the best looking miniatures in the world, but there's a huge amount of nostalgia and awesomeness attached to them that people love. I'm actually one of them. I love the Old Hammer stuff. I wish I could be there. But likewise, with the background and the fluff, people just reading novels. You can go to a major bookseller like Borders is gone. What was it in the States? Barnes & Noble. Here would be like Chapters or Indigo in Canada. You can go to, what's it called? The new Warhammer store signs look like it in the UK. I can't remember what it's called now. I can't remember. But yeah, there's a big book chain in the UK too that has all those, it's on the tip of my tongue, it's W word too, that has all of the Warhammer books. And they have their own section, right? There's like a section for Warhammer novels, for Black Library novels, which means that there are a ton of people enjoying that miniature war game for a ton of different reasons, and not all of them are competitive play, right? So if your local area, you can find some people that want to play it or participate in the same way as you, then you should dive in. So those are my two kind of case studies for how I would go down a checklist of learning about a new miniature game. The internet, check around locally. Sometimes you have to check around locally on the internet to find out if people are playing the game in your area or if you're starting. Then selecting models. Why do I want to play this game? Am I playing it to paint them? Am I playing it to play it? Am I painting the miniatures? Am I just kind of collecting them? Am I just interested in the background, buying the books? And again, I think you have to look at that kind of 80-20 equation of, does this offer me what I'm looking for? And so, as my last bit, those are kind of my two case studies of applying that logic. I'm going to talk about the challenges of starting a new miniature game, because there are lots of them. All right, so challenges to playing mini war games. Oh, well, there's lots of them. I said at the very beginning of this, I wasn't going to talk about it's expensive. It's expensive is I think one we can put on the shelf because you've decided to play miniature war games. It's a personal barrier. It's one that I can't give you any advice on how to do anything about it. So we're going to put that one on a shelf. We're not going to talk about it. Another one that we're going to put on a shelf, because I want to do a whole other video about it, is the fact that a game is out of production. Now, you might become totally enamored with the game that is no longer made. I think that's a show in and of itself. So I'm going to talk about that one later too. So the first one I do want to talk about is players around here in my local area don't have the same hobby as me. That is difficult. So what do I mean by that? I mean, the guys around here play in a way, or they interact with miniature wargaming in a way that I don't necessarily want to. So for instance, if I was to use an example from previous, I'm a guy who loves painting War Machine miniatures. But in my local area, nobody paints their War Machine miniatures and wants to talk about painting War Machine miniatures. That's hard. I mean, that's a challenge. If what you're looking for is to enjoy that hobby of painting War Machine miniatures with a group locally, you might want to reevaluate if that's something you're going to be able to do. Now, there are resources, and that's actually, if I was to invert that same thing and say, well, there's Infinity players around here, but all they do is paint their miniatures and they don't ever want to play, it would still be the same problem, right? People around here don't look at this stuff the same way as I do. So you kind of have two options there. One, you can attempt to introduce it. So you can find someone you know that has interest in the same miniature war game and say, hey, if you've never done this before, why don't you come over and we'll try it this way? Or why don't we meet up somewhere and try it this way? So, hey, I was gonna have a painting night at my house. I know you wanted to go to a War Machine tournament at some point that has all your miniatures painted. Why don't we just hang out and do some painting? I can give you some tips and tricks on real simple ways to get your models finished so that they would be okay to go in a Iron Gauntlet competition or a War Machine weekend or whatever where you have a painting requirement. Pull that lever of, at some point to do the thing that you want to do, you will have to do the thing that I like doing, so why don't we do it? That one's worked out really well for me in the past as a spur to help people get stuff painted when I was trying to encourage painting to happen, because I hate playing against unpainted miniatures. I would just often encourage people to come over and paint with me because I'm an easygoing guy. I like watching bad movies and eating nachos. so why not do that and get some stuff painted at the same time? And because I'm a pretty experienced painter, I know tons of tricks where you can do 4-color standard on models and actually have them look really good, from the 2-foot rule of standing above a gaming board. So that kind of stuff. Try and get people, just ask and try and get people involved in the aspect that you're interested in. Likewise, guys who are collecting, let's say Infinity miniatures that are painting them a whole bunch. Play some small games. Invite them to play some small games. Encourage them to play some games. Most interests have to start somewhere, and waiting for someone else to do it for you, it won't happen. So you have to kind of be proactive if the people in your local area aren't interested in that particular miniature war game in the same way that you are. And be willing to be a bit of a leader sometimes. That's just the way that it has to be. So next challenge I wanted to talk about is miniatures not being available locally. That is a problem. And it can be very hard with some sort of like crazier miniature companies to even get a hold of their miniatures. I was trying to get some miniatures from a company called Taban. It's a French miniature company. They make a post-apocalyptic miniature game called Eden. It's a nice little kitchen table game. It's like a little 2x2 board skirmish game, kind of Fallout inspired. And I really just wanted them to play against my Fallout miniatures. I just wanted the miniatures. I didn't really care about the game. But I can only find, there's nowhere locally when I was living in Tennessee that would have them. I can only find them at this one store in San Francisco, yeah, that same game castle. Actually, no, it was in a store called Endgame, I think, at the time. So I ended up picking a bunch of them up and then ordering a whole bunch more from France when they were first pre-released and just getting them shipped to me. And those are really the ways that you have to try and find things. It can be really expensive to get stuff shipped to you from overseas, especially if you're living in Canada. You get hit by duty on top of whatever you've paid. Duty. The duty fees, the tax that you have to pay when stuff comes across the border. So there's ways around that. I mean, you can search for local online stores. Guys are already importing it to sell it, to tell it to you. You know, you can look for a local gaming store and ask them if they can order it. Maybe they can get it from a distributor. Those are all ways of doing it. And then here's the thing. Instead of trying to get your local gaming store to order it for you, order it for yourself first. Because if I was a game store owner, here's what I would never believe. If someone said to me, or actually anytime anyone ever said to me, hey, if you had this in stock, I would buy it. 9 times out of 10, it's not true. It's the reason that someone would be telling you that they're not going to spend money in your store today. Oh, I only want this one thing and you don't have it. It's not true. If it's a product line I don't carry, if it's a line I already carry, I would say it is true. If it's a line I don't already carry, I doubt the veracity of that. But if somebody walks in already having shelled out a ton of money to get at least a sampling of those things and says, hey, I bought a bunch of stuff online, it's super expensive. Can you see if you can get it from your distributor? Because I'll totally buy it from you. That'd have me on my phone and my distributor saying, hey, can I get this stuff? Because I got a guy he's paying way more than I would, have to charge him to get this from overseas and imported and shipped here. Can you get this stuff for me locally? And that would be my next step. And if you want to overcome that challenge, that's usually the best way to do it. I've had success with that with local gaming stores, getting them to stock or carry a line, which then helps you find opponents and people to play against by showing up with it first. Because then you're showing that you've got some kind of a commitment to play this war game and kind of like blaze a trail. And then the last challenge that I kind of want to talk about is, hey, no one plays this game. Well, that's a challenge we'll talk about in the next video too, in the dead miniature games or miniature games that are in production. But no one plays this game. Well, you do. And sometimes if you are really interested in either new miniature games, games that haven't really existed up until this point and are just coming out, or as I'm going to talk about in the next week's episode, dead miniature games, that are production miniature games, you're going to have to do some work to get people to play it with you. And if you're really passionate about that game and you think that game is really cool, then that work will be worth it, right? There'll be a payoff to getting to actually enjoy that, whatever that aspect of that hobby is that you like, when you do that work. So what do I mean by that? Well, what is the work? I keep referring to the work, but I'm not saying what it is. It boils down to, if you are buying a miniature game that no one in the local area plays, no stores carry, and there is no metaphor, you're going to have to buy 2 armies. Sorry, I said it. You're going to have to buy 2 armies. You're going to have to do the work that you wish that company was doing, showing people how to play that game. And the reason I'm going to tell you you're going to have to do it is I've been doing it for almost 20 years. I have taught more people to play different miniature games, and I don't mean at work, because I was being paid to. I mean in my spare time, than I care to admit. And it's almost always why I have 2 armies for every miniature game. At least 2 armies for every miniature game. It's why I had 2 War Machine armies, because I was teaching people how to play War Machine when it first came out. It's why I've got 2 Infinity armies, 2 Malifaux armies, 2 armies of all these cottage games. I have 2 Victory Decision armies. I have like 5 Epic armies. I have multiple Necromunda gangs and Mordheim gangs. It's because I always had the loner army. I have like 15 Blood Bowl teams that people could borrow so they could play a game. And that is the way you get around having no players. I said this about the whole put your money where your mouth is to get people to stock a game for you, because it'll get you more opponents. This is the same thing. Be willing to teach people how to play a game. Be willing to teach people who aren't already miniature wargamers how to play a game. This popped into my head because I was talking to Elliot, I think your name is. You sent me a message on my Facebook page about how you're living in Goose Bay and you only have one other guy who's a mini wargamer in your area. And this is something that's been on my mind because I've done it so many times, and your comment kind of sparked my brain. You have to be unafraid to show people who aren't already mini wargamers how to play miniature games. It's just something you have to do. If you want to enjoy a game that's very fringe or small or not well supported, having 2 armies and being willing to teach people how to play, it's super important. People do it at conventions all the time. People use online message boards. I actually, when I moved to Tennessee, I created Memphis Tabletop Gamers, which was a message board that barely ever got used, but managed to find me somebody who played Mercs, believe it or not. I owned every faction for Mercs because I taught like a half dozen people how to play it. and I had everything to play it too. I almost had like a demo setup, although I never officially demoed for those guys. It pays off if you do it. You will get to play the game that you want, but you gotta be willing to put in some work. So those are the big challenges I could think of. I think all the other little challenges can kind of get lumped underneath them. Now, the one I did think that was big enough that I could make my own show out of it was Dead Miniature Games. As near and dear to my heart, because I love lots of Dead Miniature Games. So I kind of wanted to do a show about it, so that'll be next week. So there's my talk about starting how to play a new game, and the process that I would use. I did a couple of case studies of what I would go through, researching it online, looking at the local meta and who plays locally, and then deciding, well, what do I want to get out of this game? Does that fit? Does that fit with what's going on here, that 80-20 rule, before I even spend any money? And then the second part is the challenges you can see and some of the ways that I've overcome those challenges. So if this helped one person, I hope it does help one person to get to play the miniature game that they want, the way they want to play it, or if nothing else, it stirs up some discussion and debate, then I would consider this successful. I hope you guys enjoyed it. It's been a lot of fun for me to kind of think about and write my little script for, because I actually write scripts for all these things, believe it or not. It sounds like I ramble, but I have talking points for all these things. Yeah, then great. So on with the next thing, which is on the painting table. Let's check out what I've been working on. All right, so first things first, I found my Rhinox cavalry for Warhammer. I have a unit of, well, I have 6 Rhinox cav. I plan on building them as 2 units of 3 with Iron Fists. Oops, actually I have to pull it back if you guys want to see it. With Iron Fists and heavy armor. I'm not going to give them banners because if they ever flee from combat, the way that Warhammer Fantasy Battle works is if your unit flees from combat, the banner bearer stays and defends the flag to the last and dies automatically. So if there's 3 models in a unit and they're all about 100 points each, and one of them dies automatically if they ever flee, that's like 100 points in casualties for running away. So I'm not going to buy them banners. I'm going to have faith that they can cause enough damage on the charge that they're not going to do it, and I won't play Blood and Glory enough that having a ton of banners is going to matter. I will give musicians though, because being able to rally at +1 leadership is super useful, and break ties too for cavalry can be hugely useful. Probably won't give them a champion though, because being able to be challenged out and lose some attacks is not something I'm super excited about. So there they are. There's my 6. The riders, I'm building them separately from the actual cavalry guys. I tend to do that. They're base coated with what is it? Scorched brown, but it's like a spray paint scorched brown that I found, I think, from Painter's Touch. Yeah, I think that's what it is. And then I've got some cork in the base and stuff for bits of rocks and rocky outcroppings and stuff. So getting those built is on my painting agenda, because obviously I've been getting beat up a whole bunch with my ogres and I want to start painting something new. And then I've got a couple of wolves I was painting for Dave. So these are the 2 big giant thunder wolves that are pulling Logan's boat thing. I don't know what it's called. I'll be honest, it's like my least favorite 40k release. I'm a Space Wolf player. I don't like it very much. I like my Logan that I built way better. And what I've done is, for him, he's actually off at Valhalla right now. I got the Logan miniature finished first, and I magnetized him on a 40 mil base. Conveniently, you can't fit a 40 mil base into the little boat thing. What I wanted to do was just take a press mold impression of the deck plating on the actual boat and put it on his base and just be able to pop them on and off on a base. But the inside of the boat is too small for a 40 mil base to fit in there. So I had to magnetize him instead. So I built a whole other base, put magnets in his feet, put metal plates in the base, put metal plates in the boat. And Logan's done. He's at Valhalla right now. I'm sure you'll see Dave play with him at some point because he's kind of awesome. But the boat is here. The actual chariot thing is here. And I painted it in pieces. I painted the chariot piece and the 2 wolves separately. And yeah, they just need to be assembled. So I basically finished the wolves here. They just need some like minor details and to have the rocks and stuff that are on their bases finished. So that's what's on the painting table for me this week. All right, guys, thanks for watching this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Talking about how to kind of think about getting into a miniature game, some things to consider, some sort of steps that I would go through whenever I was starting to play a miniature game or collect a new one. And then, of course, some of the challenges that you can face when you're starting to play a miniature game or getting into something for the first time. And then, of course, checking out what was on my painting table. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll be back with episode 6. We're going to talk about dead miniature games, games that are out of production. It's a topic that's kind of near and dear to my heart because I do love so many of those games. So, until then, happy wargaming.